Alright, so today we are testing the RTX 4080 in the Lord of the Rings Gollum. Now I'm pairing this GPU with a 12700K CPU running at stock, and that again is paired with DDR4 4000 MHz CL18 memory. So currently, let's just go over the settings here. Let me just get rid of that. And we're running at 1440p at the moment on the Epic preset. I don't have any upscaling enabled, and no ray tracing is enabled either. This game does support frame generation, but that is also not enabled. Alright, let's just start our benchmark run here. Let's see how it goes. This is going to be the first time playing this game, so you're going to be experiencing it with me. But from what I could see online, the game has a lot of issues. I mean, if you just have a look at what the game looks like, especially in this lighting, like what's going on there with his hair. I'm not going to make that jump. All right. We hate this land. At least the voiceover seems to be quite okay. I mean, it does sound like Gollum or Smeagol. But so far we're looking okay in the VRAM usage department. We are sitting at around 8.5 gigabytes of VRAM used, although our 0.1% low numbers really seem to suffer quite a lot. And just look at those stutters as you move around. I mean, just look at the textures here on his back. This just looks terrible, right? This game should be running at well over 200 frames per second at this stage, especially if you take the visuals into consideration. Close up, it doesn't look too terrible, but the moment you zoom out a little bit, it just looks very cheap. Just look at the textures on the wall here. This is some very entry-level textures. Definitely not what you'd expect from a AAA title, especially seeing that it has been delayed as well. So this is the product we get even after the delay. Let's see if I can make this jump. There we go. All right, so at 1440p so far, the game doesn't seem to be terrible. I mean, those stutters are really annoying, but the frame time graph is quite consistent, except for the stutters, obviously. Just have a look at the spikes there. But I expected quite a lot worse, actually. I mean, don't get me wrong, it doesn't perform well on any level, but this is not as bad as what I've seen online. I mean, we are getting around 120 frames per second. Surely I'd expect quite a bit more, just based on the game's visuals. But so far the stuttering is actually a lot less than I anticipated. Alright, let's see what happens once we actually enable ray tracing. I'm not sure if we can actually enable ray tracing without restarting the game. I haven't tested that yet. Let's try ray tracing without DLSS first and see what happens. Alright, so we dropped down from 120 frames per second to 60 frames per second, and that's a big stutter there, and another big stutter right there. So maybe and quite a few big stutters there, and now the game just seems to be more unplayable. I mean, just looking around, wow, okay, this is terrible. Maybe the footage I've seen online had ray tracing enabled. I mean, the ray tracing doesn't look good at all. No reason for it to perform the way it does, but those stutters are really, really terrible. I mean, just look at our 0.1% and our 1% lows. You can see that even our 1% lows are sitting at 8 frames per second, whereas previously our 1% lows were pretty respectable, but our 0.1% lows indicated some stuttering. And where do I just grab this one as well? All right, not so difficult being Gollum. And unfortunately, that cutscene cost us our performance metrics. Let's just restart that. Right, so outside we're getting around 80 frames per second, whereas inside we got around 60 to 70 frames per second. But this just does not look good at all. I'm not sure exactly what kind of ray tracing the game actually supports, whether it's just shadows or ambient occlusion. I mean, wow. Okay, that was ridiculous. So, yeah, I'm not entirely sure exactly what ray tracing the game actually utilizes, but from what I can see is that it is actually extremely intensive. It really is a shame, considering that the books were so successful and the movies were really brilliant. and now we are stuck with this. Right, Shadow of Mordor, the previous Lord of the Ring games, those were actually very good as well. This is just a cash grab attempt, I'm assuming. But now inside we're getting even less than 60 frames per second. We're still not CPU bound. We are utilizing our GPU in the high 90s. It's staying above 95% at all times, as far as I could see anyway. But performance is very inconsistent. I mean, I actually had a little bit of hope seeing that playing at 1440p without ray tracing actually did well. But this is terrible. I mean, the low frame rate is quite expected once you enable ray tracing, but those stutters were really, really terrible. And another cutscene, like this game is just full of cutscenes. So once again, that just messed with our performance metrics. All right, but on that note, let's enable DLSS. I'm going to switch it to quality. Let's see what happens. But before we do that, I just want to see the VRAM usage. So we're sitting at around 8.8 gigabytes of VRAM at 1440p Ultra with ray tracing enabled, which is not terrible. But then again, these textures do look crap, so I can't expect them to use more memory than what they are currently doing. Right, I'm going to just enable DLSS quality, and frame generation is going to stay off for now. Let's just see, we're getting around 60 frames per second, and I don't think I applied the settings. I did not. Now I did, and we're back to 156 frames per second. That's terrible. I mean it's great, but we gained 90 frames per second just by enabling DLSS. What's that about? Let's just make sure that frame generation didn't get turned on. Frame generation is off. I mean, let's see. I just want to see if we actually do get a frame rate bump with frame generation. So from 150 to 215. All right. So frame generation is definitely disabled. And we are only on DLSS quality, right? So, I mean, this was with ray tracing DLSS quality. Let's just reset our numbers, and 155 frames per second. This is better than what we had at native without ray tracing. So DLSS seems to work quite well in this game. I mean, performance-wise, I'm no visual expert, so I can't comment on what the game actually looks like with DLSS enabled. I'm here for the performance metrics, and that's all I'll be focusing on. That and trying to get out of this cave. And that was a big stutter there. That's just probably traversal stutter from Unreal Engine 4. Remember, this game uses Unreal Engine 4, which is notorious for its traversal stutters. But we are getting quite a high frame rate here. But once again, you can see that our 0.1% lows are okay. Those stutters are really annoying. Our 0.1% load number is extremely low, but even just moving the camera around causes tremendous stutters. And as I said, the game, well, that's not where I was supposed to be going, I assume. But so we can actually wall run. Interesting. I would not have thought Gollum could actually wall run. But these stutters are terrible. Really, really terrible. I mean, and they're so close to each other. I mean, just look at the frame time graph there. It's extremely, extremely flat. And then you just move around, and all of a sudden, it's going crazy. All right, so actually, let's see if frame generation can help us with some of these stutters. Because we are now CPU bound, you can see that our GPU usage is dropping below 80% there. So definitely CPU bound, and frame generation can help quite a lot when CPU bound. So let's see if frame generation can actually help us a bit with our stuttering. It's not meant to take away or to completely eliminate stutters, but it can definitely assist in alleviating them. Alright, frame generation is now enabled. We're getting 230 frames per second, and our GPU usage has gone up to 98%. Now, that's not true usage actually. I mean, it's inserting fake frames, as people like to call it. It's AI generated frames, and it just helps with the motion fluidity, right? You can see our GPU power is sitting around 250 watts, which is pretty good considering we're getting 240 frames per second with ray tracing enabled. I mean, that's such a small flame. Look at the amount of damage it actually does. Oh, come on. That's terrible. But you can see that our frame times, our frame rates look quite okay. Our frame time graph looks okay. So frame generation, I spoke too soon. There we go. That was a pretty big stutter. We've got our 1% lows are sitting at 200 frames per second, and our 0.1% lows are sitting at 9. I mean, that's if that's not inconsistent, then I don't know what is. It probably will recover. I mean, it's back up to 57 already, so it'll recover, but depending on how frequently these stutters would occur from here on out. All right, I'm just going to try and get over this ledge here, and then we'll switch to 4K. Alright, we're now at 4K, still on the Epic preset, and just look at that frame time graph. Just looking around, that's not a pretty sight. I mean, we are just literally climbing ledges here, and you can just see the frame time graph, those major spikes. I should probably hide from these orcs, right? Because apparently this game doesn't really have combat, which makes sense. But you can only attack these orcs from behind, and Gollum chokes them, so that's pretty much what you can do. I mean, what even is this? It just turned black with green eyes. Probably to show that it's hiding or that you are invisible, but that just looks so stupid. But at 4K, here we go again. At 4K, we're getting around 60 frames per second. Our 0.1% low number is still extremely low, and that's the reason why. And it's not just traversal stutters, it's maybe shader compilation stutters. I'm not entirely sure, but just moving around. I know that texture streaming is enabled, but that's enabled by default. I'm not going to be playing around with the advanced settings now. So texture streaming does actually reduce the VRAM usage a bit, but it might be contributing to the stutters that we are seeing. Alright, so at 4K native, no ray tracing, we are actually able to maintain 60 frames per second. I mean, definitely not at all times if you look at the frame time graph. So I don't think it's shader compilation stutter either, because we've been here and everything here should have been pre-compiled by now, and we are still seeing those stutters, right? So Unreal Engine 4 strikes once again. Alright, let's see what happens at native when we enable ray tracing. Just one thing that I had to change to full screen, otherwise the 4K resolution didn't apply. It was on windowed full screen, and I set it to 4K, I clicked apply, it showed it was applied, but it did not apply. Alright, so some menu bugs still maybe, but now you can see that we've got ray tracing enabled, no DLSS, and no frame generation. Previously at 1440p, our frame rate more than halved. And over here, we dropped down from 60 frames per second to 45 frames per second. Right, so only a 25% loss in performance here, which is definitely not terrible. But once again, this game doesn't look particularly good. So, I mean, any performance loss based on the visuals is actually a surprise. And once again, when ray tracing is enabled, we are seeing these major frame rate dips. I mean, there's a difference between a big frame rate dip and a stutter. Stutters are usually picked up with the 0.1% low number, but major frame rate dips are actually picked up in the 1% low number as well. So this is just a combination of both, the major stuttering and extreme frame rate dips. But you can see we are using around 11.5 gigabytes of VRAM here. It's allocating 14 gig. But only using around 11.7. So if you do have a 4070 Ti, then I expect you to be running out of VRAM soon if you play this game at 4K. I'm not entirely sure what I should be doing here. Will they be able to spot me if I run this way? Maybe. I think that was what was supposed to happen. Anyway, the cinematics just dropped down to 30 frames per second, and that just messes up my benchmark run here. So our average is maybe not as accurate, but these stutters are definitely a representation of what the game's performance is like. I mean, that's Just look at that frame time graph there. I mean, that's a big spike in the frame time graph, then it comes down, then a big spike. So it's just multiple spikes right after each other, and that just literally ruins any gameplay. Anyway, so at 4K with ray tracing enabled, we had an average of 47 frames per second. I feel like that is pretty accurate, but our 1% and 0.1% low numbers, they just tell a different story. They tell a story of what the game is actually like. All right, let's see if DLSS can save us here. But before we do that, just look at the VRAM usage there. It's now sitting at 12.1. Okay, it's coming down a little bit, but it was at 12.3 gigabytes for a moment there. And I mean, for textures that look like this, yeah, not ideal. All right, let's see what happens once we enable DLSS. Now, for those of you who wonder, you can actually enable DLAA, which is Deep Learned Anti-Aliasing. So it uses the same AI for anti-aliasing as what is used for DLSS, except it's not being upscaled. I tested it with and without DLAA before I started recording this video, and the performance hit is very minimal. So if you aren't planning on using DLSS, then you can definitely use DLAA. But the moment you enable DLAA, you can't enable DLSS. Just keep that in mind. All right, so let's just go with the DLSS quality. All right, let's just reset our numbers here. And now, once again, we basically double our frame rate. And that to me is just very weird because we just enabled DLSS quality, nothing too spectacular. Why is he crouching now? So it's definitely strange that you'd get that big a bump just by enabling DLSS quality. But DLSS definitely does seem to help in this game, right? All right, I'm going to reset the numbers once again. And now we are getting around 80 frames per second, 90 frames per second. But as you can see at 4K with DLSS quality, with ray tracing enabled, we are definitely getting quite a high frame rate here, right? 100 frames per second is definitely not terrible. I just find it very, very funny that his color actually changes the moment you start hiding in the grass here. All right, but just once again, look at our 1% and our 0.1% low numbers there. The 1% low number and the average frame rate is respectable, but our 0.1% low numbers, they just tell us that the stuttering was pretty bad. All right, whilst we are here, I'm just going to enable frame generation. Right, so I just enabled frame generation and we went from 100 frames per second to around 130 frames per second, which is a nice 30% bump in performance for those of you who are unsure about the math. And I think, yeah, we actually are going to be able to kill an orc, which is pretty good. I mean, it's going to take forever. I'm going to give this game one positive from my little time I've spent with it, and that's the voice acting. I do find Smeagol or Gollum to be quite believable, actually. His voice is actually very well done. That's just my opinion, all right? And once again, a cutscene, which drops down to 15 frames per second. Can you believe that? Alright, I'm just going to have to reset our numbers again. This game is actually very frustrating to benchmark because let's go with Gollum. Alright, it's very frustrating to benchmark because it's just all these cutscenes. Alright, I'm just going to reset our numbers here. I skipped a couple of cutscenes. I don't want to spoil anything for the 7 of you that might actually play this game. Badly injured, and as I said, we are, well, I mean, I can't even run at the moment. We are getting quite a high frame rate, 150 frames per second, with the ray tracing enabled, DLSS quality and frame generation enabled as well. We don't really need frame generation, even at 4K. DLSS quality gave us around 100 frames per second, so which is pretty good. I mean, that's I definitely play like that at 4K. But once you enable frame generation, getting around 140, 150 frames per second, which is obviously better than 100 frames per second. But for a game like this, it doesn't really matter. Anything above 60 frames per second would be fine. It's just that the stuttering is really annoying. I'd even go as far as to say that the stuttering is game breaking. Sure, in this small area here, we haven't seen that many stutters, maybe just one or two, but the moment you actually get into a little bit more open areas, it just becomes a bit of an issue. But all right, on that note, we're just going to leave it there. Thank you guys for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and as always, we hope to see you in the next one.